Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today we are delving back into the standard format of the Pokemon trading card game with some games from Huddersfield Regionals. Now, I have put up 2 league challenges, one from Norwich, one from Sheffield, both in the standard format. I heartily suggest you go and check them out, and I'm going to be uploading a whole bunch of games from Huddersfield Regionals. Links will be in the description of the videos, so make sure you check all of them out, ladies and gentlemen. A couple things you need to know. This was a regionals with about 92 masters, which is very big for the UK, and it might seem like a low amount, but remember, there's about 15 to 20 people who have been to Worlds playing out of those 92. So we're talking a competitive 92. Swiss is 7 rounds. It is 50 minutes, best of 3, and we are in standard format before Breakthrough is legal. So we're talking X and Y to Ancient Origins. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with round 1 from Huddersfield Regionals. As you can see there, we've got IQ Gaming, their logo. That's a lovely shop. You can see the round, you can see the time, and you can see that we've got Paul Stringer on the left and Jake Walvin on the right. And if I am correct here, we have a Giratina Aromatisse Mirror Match. Now, huge shout out before we start to Terry Goodacre. He recorded the footage and very nicely let me have it. He's also in charge of selecting the games. If you don't like the games, that's on Terry. Although he couldn't have picked really many better players to be in round 1. Can't imagine there was a juicier matchup in round 1. We'll get into both the players as we go. So, Jake, we see the Double Dragon energy going down there with the Ultra Ball. There is a giveaway that he's playing Giratina as well. We see Paul on the left. He starts with a Giratina. Not a bad starter in most games, but if anybody doesn't know this, anyone know what Giratina's weak to? Yeah, he's weak to Fairy. You do not want a Giratina on the field in this game. And as we look, I would be very, very surprised. I mean, Jake is blatantly going to be going for a Xerneas here, unless he needs a Shaman to start drawing some cards. Although even popping a Shaman down here, then there is a Xerneas. What you don't want in this game is to bench any EXs. That's just going to give away easy prizes for your opponent. So what you want to be doing here, it's going to basically turn into a Xerneas fight. Now, if you've got a Lugia, you might bring out Lugias to aid you in said fight. But essentially, it's just going to be Xerneas on Xerneas crimes. Because, you know, I mean, these decks generally play Xerneas and Giratina. They are your main attackers. And it looks like we had a Sycamore there from Jake. And essentially, you know, Giratina's terrible in this matchup. He takes 4 energy, he's weak to Xerneas, and Xerneas for just 3 energy can get the one-hit KO. And we see another Double Dragon energy and a Giratina there from Jake, playing the Ultra Ball, and he is making very, very clear. He's got a couple of Spritzies out as well, which is really going to help, and here comes the Shaman. Jake could well be playing an AZ, the supporter card that allows him to pick up one of his Pokemon, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that Shaman getting picked up with AZ and staying off the field later in the game. And Jake there, by getting rid of his second Double Dragon energy and his Giratina, he's made it very, very clear that he is not going to be going for any kind of Giratina shenanigans. Now, crucially, no energy here from Jake. That means, unless he's got some kind of switch, he's going to have to use AZ to get Spritzy out of the active or forego the turn to Geomancy. As I mentioned in some of the games from Sheffield Regionals, and I heartily recommend you go and check them out, I'm a huge fan of switching Aromatisse Giratina. I was playing this same deck at this very tournament. I'm not on stream because if I'm doing the commentating, I'd rather not be on stream. But I played 2 switch to help get the turn 1 or the turn 2 Geomancy. So an Ultra Ball comes down from Paul here. He's got a couple of Spritzy out, and that really helps. Unfortunately, he's having to dump an energy, and you don't want to dump the energy. You want the energy in your deck so you can Geomancy and get a whole bunch of energy down. The Mirror Match, if one player gets out a lot more than the other, that will give that player a huge advantage in the Mirror Match. They can pile on a Lugia, etc. So Jake, he doesn't have a way to get the Spritzy out of the active. Now we can assume that a Fairy Garden is going to come down. And of course, Jake doesn't need the energy for the turn 2 Geomancy. So he doesn't need the turn 1 energy for the turn 2 Geomancy, as long as he can get a Fairy Garden and an Aromatisse as a Shaman comes down from Paul here. And it would be good to see him AZ that Giratina, just get it off the field and, just take away the easy prizes for Jake. So it looked like he might have had an Aromatisse there. Oh, and he's got the Fairy Garden. This is wonderful for Jake here on turn 2. He's going to be able to attach the Fairy Energy to the Spritzy. He's going to be able to use the Fairy Garden to free retreat the Spritzy. And as long as he evolves into an Aromatisse, he's going to be able to use Aromatisse's ability to move the energy up to the Xerneas and get going there, which is going to be really, really good. So we see the level ball. Maybe he didn't have an Aromatisse in hand. It can be hard to see what's in their hand, so don't be too mad at me for that. But yeah, the Aromatisse comes down from the level ball, and this is going to be absolutely key here. Because this is, assuming he's got an energy, this is going to allow him to get the turn 2 Geomancy without the switch. I still stand by my you need switch for turn 1 Geomancy comment, but clearly Jake doesn't need it here for turn 2. Assuming he's got an energy, and remember he didn't have an energy last turn. He still doesn't have an energy, and he's got to Sycamore there, and we saw him lose a VS Seeker, and we do see him get the energy there, which is moderately crucial, shall we say. So the energy goes on the Aromatisse. He can free retreat, stick the Xerneas active, and pop the energy. And it's a very small point there, but a very nice little play Jake did was he put the Xerneas active without the muscle band. All he's doing here is going to be using Geomancy to attach 1 fairy energy each to 2 of his bench Pokemon from the deck. And although the likelihood is Paul can't KO the active Xerneas, Jake wants to make sure that, the thing in the active is the thing he can most spare. So keeping the muscle band on the bench Xerneas, it's a very, very small play, but it's actually a very important play. It's, even if it might not be crucial this particular time, it is an excellent habit to get into. And we see him putting the energy on the Shaman, not the Aromatisse, and that's absolutely crucial. Again, it's a really nice, well, not crucial, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's a very nice play. He can Sky Return that Shaman to either get it off the field or just do 30 damage. And, okay, so... Oh, and Paul doesn't have the Aromatisse, so Paul is not able to retreat and move the energy up, which is not good. Now, what he could have done was use the AZ to pick up the Giratina rather than the Shaman, but I'm not sure if he would have had the energy to actually do that. So, we saw a switch there for Paul would have been crucial. Maybe I'm going too much into the switch in Aromatisse. Quite frankly, who knows? And I am bashing this table and that camera a little bit. So going back to what I was saying about Jake, having that second energy on the Shaman means that he can, do the Sky Return. And it also means that if the Aromatisse gets KO'd, he's got an energy there ready to use, whereas if he puts an Aromatisse on an energy on the Aromatisse and it gets KO'd, that energy has essentially gone. So we see a couple of trainers mails from Jake, and they're not doing very good. They allow him to look at the top 4 cards of his deck and choose any trainer card, but I think he got a Fairy Garden from the first one, and there's a Fairy Garden down, and nothing from the second. Now, an interesting little play here from Jake, using the Shaman to do 50 damage with the Muscle Band and putting it back to his hand. Now, what that's going to actually allow him to do is KO the Xerneas, because Xerneas does 100 damage with the Muscle Band, that'll go up to 120. Xerneas has 130 HP, so there is no one-hit KO here. So using the Shaman to just do that 50 damage, firstly, gets the Shaman off the field to take away the 2 easy prizes. Secondly, it puts the Shaman in hand, allowing him to use it to draw more cards the next turn. And thirdly, puts the Xerneas in KO range. We know he's got an energy in hand. He's got 2 in hand, which means that Jake will have the KO this coming turn. It's going to happen. Now we see Jake there did finally get the Geomancy, putting 2 energy down. Doesn't look, I can't see through his hand, he doesn't seem to have an Aromatisse out yet, which is a fairly big deal. So Jake starting off his turn, he's got that, just got on that VS Seeker, which is very, very handy. He is going to be able, if he wants, to stick a 3rd energy on the field, move all 3 of them onto the active Xerneas and get the KO. Safe in the knowledge that Paul is not going to get a return KO. And that's, obviously very, very useful for Jake. He knows that Paul isn't going to do 130. Now, Paul's probably playing Lugia, but you would need 7 energy total. Xerneas, I know you see a Shauna coming down for Jake. In order for Xerneas to do the attack, he has to discard an energy, which means there will be 2 energy on the Xerneas, which means you need 5 on a Lugia to get the KO. Now, Paul would have 4 down, so he would be able to do that. It would be a very big risky play, but given that Jake's got the faster start, that would be an option available to Paul. Paul would be able, if Jake went for the KO with Xerneas, Paul would be able to pile 5 energy onto a Lugia and KO the Xerneas, getting rid of the energy. Jake has probably also realised this, so he's going, what is a very nice conservative play, 2 energy Lugia. No, 3 energy Lugia, which will get the KO. Now, Lugia, we need a grand total of 9 energy to KO, or 8 and a muscle band. There's 3 on. Now, Paul could still get the KO here. He'd need an Aromatisse, a Lugia, an energy, and a muscle band, but there would then be 8 energy in total, plus the muscle band means he'd do 180 damage and KO the Lugia. So, Jake has put himself in a slightly vulnerable position here. I know at Sheffield League Challenge, where Paul played this deck, he did play a Lugia, and a one-off Lugia is a very common tech for this Aromatisse Giratina match. It's a very common tech for this deck. Having said that, Jake is fully aware that Paul has failed to get Aromatisse out on turns 1 and 2, and it's a lot to ask for. If Paul doesn't get the KO here, the game, and he got the Lugia, he's got the energy, but he doesn't have the Aromatisse, he doesn't have the muscle band, and now we are in a whole world of hurt. Jake now can put 3 energy on the Xerneas. He's now able to conserve an energy to leave it on the field, so he's not losing all of his energy if it goes down. He's going 3 prizes up. He's got the muscle band on the Lugia, and here we see the KO. Now Jake is 3 prizes up, and okay, now Paul could just use the and he scoops straight away. And the reason is, yeah, he can use the Lugia to KO the Aromatisse, but then he's still down by 2 prizes, and now he's got a Lugia in the active that Jake can start going after with his own Lugia. So Paul was never going to win that game, unfortunately. But very wisely, he realises, look, I'm 12 minutes into the game. We've got 15 minutes to get through 3 games. I don't want to draw. Draws suck. Nobody wins in a draw. I mean, both metaphorically and quite literally, nobody wins in a draw. That's why it's a draw. So he's scooping here, and by the time they set up, they're going to have something like 18 minutes each for games 2 and 3. This is far from over, ladies and gentlemen. But we saw both players there. They knew about the mirror. They took away the Giratina, or at least Jake took away the Giratinas, and Paul was unfortunately made to start with one. But as we often see with mirror matches, Jake had a better start, and that's all there is. Huge, huge thank yous to IQ Gaming, you see their logo there. They allowed us to record these games at the venue, and that was just frankly lovely of them. And again, huge thank you to Terry Goodacre, lovely chap who, gave up his free time, wasn't playing at the tournament, gave up his free time to record these games, and then emailed me the or at least sent me links to the video files so that I could get these online for you guys, get the commentary up and running. And I am going to be putting these up thick and fast over the next couple of weeks. We've got, I think, 10 rounds from this tournament, and we've got, I believe, 7 rounds coming from Sutton Coldfield Regionals as well. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful time. Now, in terms of both of these players, we saw Paul Stringer at Sheffield League Challenge, the last set of games I put up there on my YouTube, which you should be watching, but if you need a reminder, it's youtube.com/PTCGRadio. Paul went to Worlds this past year, I believe, for the first time, and it was very, very difficult to get from day 1 to day 2. He was 1 win away. He came very, very close. Jake Walvin is a former top 4 Nationals competitor, although he did play 2 supporters to get TQ'd from the top 4 of Nationals. Top 2 would have got him a paid invite, but less about that. And he has played at Worlds before, and he's gotten some decent results at Worlds. I want to say top 32. I would have to double check that that's definitely true. Either way, we've got 2 players here who both went to Worlds last year, and Jake not for the first time. He's been a couple of years now, and almost certainly will both qualify for Worlds this year. So you're seeing 2 very high-level competitors. It might be round 1 of regionals, but we've got a very high-level matchup here. And we see double Spritzy start. Paul gets to go first, and he gets the energy on the Spritzy. Oh, not a great start. 3 VS Seeker in your opening hand is not ideal. Now, Paul knows that Spritzy ain't going down. Jake's ideal turn 1 play is going to be getting the Geomancy from the Xerneas. That's his ideal turn 1 play. Although it's not going to be too easy because he hasn't started Xerneas. And unlike pretty much everyone but me, I doubt he's playing Switch in his Aromatisse deck. So he'd probably need to grab his AZ to pick up the Spritzy. Judging by your standard list, I haven't got their exact list in front of me. Judging by the... Oh, that's still not great from Paul there. Judging by the standard list, if he gets an Ultra Ball here, that could be huge. Oh man, those VS Seekers like him. They really want to be coming out. Paul, he's got the energy on the Spritzy, which means, I mean, if worse comes worse, he can manually retreat next turn, but hopefully one of them will put down a Fairy Garden. So, although Jake theoretically can get the first Geomancy, it's more likely that Paul's going to get the first Geomancy, and that means that he's going to be ahead, you know, just in terms of board position, energy on the board, etc. Although his hand is not good. He's got a VS Seeker, shockingly. He's got an AZ. I mean, what he doesn't want to do next turn is go about action. Oh, and Jake puts down an energy and a muscle band, just because otherwise he'd have to Sycamore and then play I'd just get rid of them. And then he plays Sycamore, gets down a second Spritzy, and Paul's just reading it there. He's got 1 of each going on. Now, luckily, he sees an Ultra Ball, which is potentially going to be useful here because it can get him a Shaman, which can allow him to draw more cards, or it can get him a Xerneas ready for next turn. One thing that Paul's got to worry about here is that even if he's able to, you know, get the Spritzy out of the active and a Xerneas into the active, Xerneas is... Oh, no, when he went for the Xerneas instead. Oh, and he's just gone straight for the Shauna. If you're going to go ahead and get the Geomancy, it's 1 fairy to each of 2 bench Pokemon. So if you've only got 1 bench Pokemon, you only get 1 energy. Now, it looks like Jake... Oh no, sorry, the Spritzy active, he can do Sweet Scent, but all that does is heal 20 damage from 1 of your Pokemon. He does have an attack for 2 energy, Flop, which does 20 damage, and we appear to have temporarily lost the video here. This isn't me, this is the video file. This is what happens when you record live and on location. Hopefully, the video is going to come back in the very near future. If not, I'll pause it and we will recover the video. So don't worry your pretty little heads about it. And if you just saw the the little bar coming up for VL Media Player, don't worry. And we have it back, and here's some menus, ladies and gentlemen. That's some menus. Like I say, you're recording on location, these things happen. So it looks like Paul's had a slightly better time. He's managed to empty his hand and play a Shaman for 6. He's got the Aromatisse. He's got the Xerneas. He needs desperately the stadium here. Oh, and it doesn't look like he got it, but he got an Ultra Ball. So he could double down on Shaman here if he's feeling in the mood. But he's gone for the Shauna. Obviously, if you put down a whole bunch of Shaman, then that gives Jake some, things he can grab with Lysandra to take some easy prizes. And Xerneas can one-hit KO Shaman. And that can end the game very quickly indeed. We see what I believe is a muscle band coming down on the Shaman there. Oh, and that's horrible there. We don't see a Fairy Garden. Aromatisse has a retreat cost of 2, so that means that there is no energy onto the Xerneas to do the Geomancy. We could go back a couple of turns and look. Now, Spritzy only has retreat cost of 1. Was there an opportunity for Paul to manually retreat and then maybe be able to attach an energy to the Xerneas? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I don't remember what his hand was, and we lost the feed for a moment. So Jake here is going to get the first Geomancy. He's got the Fairy Garden down. He's got the Aromatisse. He's got 2 energy on the board. He's got the Xerneas. He's got the Lugia. Anyone starting to get a sense of deja vu in this particular game? Jake has had the better start. Jake has hit the stadium when he needs, and Paul has been unable to. Jake is going to get the first Geomancy for the second game in a row. Jake's getting ready, and there we see the high five for the 7-card Sycamore. Jake is getting ready with the Lugia, and he's just setting up a better board. Paul is unfortunately struggling to set up quite as well, and that could be a problem. Now, if you look at Jake's board here, it's brilliant. He's got 2 Aromatisse on the go. You don't want only 1 in case it gets KO'd. He's got 2 Xerneas because they're likely to be your main attacker. And he's got his Lugia ready to go, which is, of course, pretty important. And I can only imagine here that the energy will be going on to possibly Lugia and Xerneas, but there is a possibility here that he's going to want to put an energy on Shaman to try the whole setup thing. But he's got a second level ball. He goes for the second Aromatisse. Now Jake's rolling really quite nicely. Now Paul can have a very similar setup next turn. He needs an Aromatisse, a Lugia, and a second Xerneas to do so. But the problem is he's going to constantly be 1 turn behind. He Geomancies the turn after Jake Geomancies. He starts attacking and doing damage the turn after Jake starts attacking and doing damage, which means he's forever going to be 1 turn behind in this game. And that's not an ideal situation to be in. Now, he gets the second Aromatisse. That's cool. We know the Fairy Garden is already out. And we see another Shauna. And he shows off he's got the enhanced hammer, but unfortunately in this particular matchup it's only good for double dragon energy. Double dragon energy can only be attached to dragons. They tend to be weak to fairies and they're both only playing Giratina, who is weak to fairy. And as previously discussed, there ain't no chance that a Giratina's hitting the field in this game. Both of these players are too experienced and quite frankly too good to make such a silly mistake. There ain't going to be no Giratinas here, ladies and gentlemen. This is a Giratina-free zone. Which makes for a... I mean, it depends how you look at this game. You could look at it as a kind of uninspiring Xerneas on Xerneas hate crime game, or you could look at it as kind of an interesting, unusual tactical battle that you're not going to often see. Fairy decks as fairy decks, they're rare, ladies and gentlemen. We don't see them very often. So, yeah. We don't see it very often, so there is a possibility that we're going to, there is something to be new to be learned in these games, shall we say. There's always something new to be learned. Like Jake's fun little Shaman play, like our discussion of how the benches should be constructed, and so on and so forth. So, Paul here, he's got a decent setup, and he's going here for the Ultra Ball, and he's got the Xerneas in the active. Now, he could attack here. Now, I don't know why you would, because he'd then be down to 2 energy, And then Jake would possibly be able to even get the KO with a Lugia. Yes, it would be possible for him to get the KO with a Lugia with a 4th energy and a muscle band. So that would be a very silly play. But you've essentially got to think about what Paul can do here. Because they've got incredibly similar setups, but Jake's 1 turn ahead. Now, what he could do is try and save the Shaman. He's going to be putting down a second Shaman here, which is risky. He can try and use AZ to bring up the Shamans, or he can try, using setup with the Shaman, Sky Return with the Shaman. I know somebody would have corrected me on that one. Doing 30 damage to the Xerneas, bringing it in range for a 1-hit KO. But if he's doing that, he's taking 2 energy off the field rather than putting 2 energy onto the field, and that's, in a very literal sense, the exact opposite of what he wants to be doing. He could focus on Lysandra and VS Seeker here, potentially, trying to get some nice easy KOs. But then if he's taking the easy KOs, he's not knocking Jake's energy off the field, and you want to do so. Now, a handy little card, and we see a Geomancy here getting 5 energy on the field, which is quite funky. Now, one thing that I played the same deck at the same tournament, and one card I played, which was really good for me, was Malamar EX. You put him on your bench, and he has an ability, so you attach an energy, and your opponent's active Pokemon goes asleep. I.e., every time you attach a fairy energy from your hand, your opponent's active goes to sleep, and then you use Aromatisse to just move it around as you like. Would be kind of useful in this matchup. Now, Jake here has done what I suggested Paul could, but shouldn't, do in the previous turn, because Jake's had one more turn of Geomancy. He uses Lysandra, he pulls up the Aromatisse, he gets the cheeky KO. Difference is, even if Paul manages to get a KO on this Xerneas, Jake still has 2 energy on the field. Whereas if if Paul had done that the previous turn, Jake could potentially have used Lugia to knock all the energy off his field and basically seal the win. And this is the advantage you get by essentially being a turn ahead, even though Jake didn't go first. He has ended up a turn ahead. Now we get Lysandra bringing active the Lugia. So Paul has basically realised, look, I can't do what Jake's doing and try and get... Is that enough for the KO? I don't know how much energy there was on that Lugia. I thought they would only do like 120, 140. I could be wrong. I could be seeing something very silly here. Because Paul's got, Lugia, if I remember correctly, does 20 damage times the total amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. Oh, I'm being a complete idiot. Sorry. Lugia has a second attack called Deep Hurricane, which does 80 damage, or if there's a stadium in play, it does 150 damage. Lugia's got 170 HP. Paul's Lugia had a muscle band attached, so a really good play from Paul there, using Lugia to do 170 damage, KOing the Lugia, and really putting Jake under a whole lot of pressure. Now, it's likely that Jake only plays one Lugia. These decks only tend to play one Lugia, which means if you get to use your Lugia to KO their Lugia, what do you do? Now, I didn't pull the trigger, but I very much considered putting a Deden in my list, because Deden, with a muscle band, one-hit KOs a free energy Lugia. No, it doesn't. No, not quite. But it does a lot of... Yes. I can't remember. No, not quite. It'll be 10 damage short. But it does a lot of damage against Lugia. Here, there really isn't a huge amount Jake can do against a Lugia. I'm assuming there's no Dedenne there. Although Dedenne would have got the one-hit KO in this respect. He does 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to the defending Pokemon. It's 40 if they're lightning weak, so he'd be doing 160 with a muscle band, he'd get the KO. Oh, and we just see another Deep Hurricane there, getting another KO on the 170 HP Giratina. And this is what happens when you're each playing one Lugia and one player knocks out the other player's Lugia. Lugia is an absolute beast when there isn't a counter. Now, I've just been chatting away about the Den. Well, there is no the Den here. The best Lugia counter that Jake's likely playing is Lugia. What's he going to do here? How does Jake take down this Lugia? And honestly, I don't think he can. I think we're going to a game 3 here. Which makes me happy, because we've got a round 1 from regionals. We've got 2 really good players, and we're going to be going to game 3. Which I think is the way it should be. Jake's got 5 prizes to take. He's got to do 140 damage to that Lugia. Now, maybe he hits Sacred Ash and an Ultra Ball. But even that wouldn't do enough damage. Maximum, Jake can get free energy. Added to... it would. Because of the Sky Return, it would do enough damage. Jake can get a maximum of free energy on the field. Added to the 4 from Lugia is 7. That does 140. With the 30 from Sky Return, would get the KO. That's literally his only chance. And we see there, it's gone. Jake literally would have had to hit a Lugia that turn using a Sacred Ash to put it back in the deck. I'm assuming he only plays 1. It's incredibly likely. Nothing he can do. So game 1, we saw Jake go ahead with a better start. Paul start the Giratina and Jake run away with it. Game 2, we saw Jake being a turn ahead. And then Paul dropping down the surprise Lugia play with Deep Hurricane and actually taking the win in a very interesting way, because as soon as Lugia takes down Lugia, if you don't have an answer, Lugia just sits there and smashes. As long as there's a stadium in play, Lugia can do 170 for 4 energy as well. If there's a stadium and he's got a muscle band, which both happened in that last game. And even if not, you can just pile energy on with Aeroball and run through everything like Mewtwo did back in the day. Really good win from Paul there, 1 game each, and I'm very genuinely excited to see what happens in game 3. Now, don't be offended, ladies and gentlemen, I did just step away for about 15 seconds. I am willing to assume you coped. I'm hoping you coped. That will make me happy. So, as we've seen in the previous games, these Xerneas decks, there is a really strong argument for going second if you can guarantee the turn 1 Geomancy. Now, if I remember the rules correctly, I know you certainly have to flip and decide before you set up for game 1. I'm fairly sure for game 3, again, you have to decide before you set up. So, Jake having the choice here, if you can get the turn 1 Geomancy, you want to go second. But the chances are you're not going to get the turn 1 Geomancy unless you start Xerneas. So, probably best to end up going first here. So, we see, I believe, a mulligan there from Jake. I didn't see Paul starting Pokemon, but we'll find out pretty quickly. He's got a couple of them. Go, Paul. So, what we're going to see here is essentially... what I like about mirrors like this between 2 good players, games 1 and 2 essentially lay out the rules for the mirror. In game 1, Jake basically showed us that if you get a good start, set up some little KOs with Shaman, you're fine. And then in game 2, Paul showed us that if you can be the person to get a big KO with Lugia on your opponent's Lugia, then you're going to win the game. So game 3 is likely to be both, and Jake started Lugia. That's not ideal here. Likely to be a little bit of a cagey game where both players play a bit safe trying to get the Lugia KO. Here's the massive advantage Paul's just gotten in this game. What you want to do, as we saw in the previous game, a Lugia on Lugia KO is huge. So what you want to do is bench your Lugia as you Lysandre and kill your opponent's Lugia. Now, Jake can't necessarily do that. So, what he's ended up doing he's now got the Lugia down, which means Paul's going to be able to bring it active. Now, he's also had to essentially bench the Giratina and the Double Dragon energy so that he can play the Shaman to draw a few cards here. But now things are looking very, very, very dodgy for Jake indeed. He's got the Lugia on the field, and as we've seen, if you can drop your Lugia for a surprise Lugia KO, that's huge. I think I might have said that enough at this stage. And he's got the Giratina on the bench, which can be easily KO'd by the Xerneas. And he's got the Shaman on the bench, which can be easily KO'd because it's only got 110 HP. What this essentially means for Paul now is Paul can just sit there and Geomancy for a few turns. He's got a Xerneas in the active, and he's got a Xerneas on the bench. As long as he can get an energy and one other bench Pokemon. What Paul can do here is just sit there and Geomancy for a few turns, get all his fairy energy on the field, and then essentially try and set up his hand so it's just Lysandra and VS Seekers, and just roll. Oh, and he's got a level ball for the Spritzy, and he's got an Aromatisse in hand. This is looking very, very good for Paul here, very, very quickly. He's just going to Geomancy for a couple of turns, ideally getting all of his fairy energy onto the field, and then he's just going to want to sit there and take some easy KOs with Lysandra, making sure he never gives Jake the opportunity to get rid of all of his energy, and then, to be honest, that could basically spell the end of the game for Jake here. Not a great start. And it's always kind of, in game 3, you always want to go first. So you can sit there and go, right, I'm going first and I've got the advantage. But with the start like this, even, I could be wrong, anything could happen. You know, Paul seemed behind in game 2 and then he pulled off the good Lugia play. But it really is at this stage, Paul has finally gotten a bit of a setup. Because all he needs is a Xerneas with an energy and 2 bench Pokemon. And he's got everything but the energy. Then he's just going to need, and he's got it in hand. All he's going to need is a few Lysandras, and he can literally, you know, just close this game out. Now, he's playing the Trainer's Mail there. There are no targets remain. Remember that a Trainer's Mail cannot get a Trainer's Mail. Remember also that you don't have to show your opponent the result of your Trainer's Mail. You can just fail it. The deck is secret. So it doesn't matter what you got from Trainer's Mail, or what the options were, I should say. But of course, if you take a trainer, you have to show your opponent, because you have to prove that what you took was in fact a trainer. So we see the Fairy Garden coming down from Paul. He's finally getting the setup that he's wanted all 3 games. He's got the Shauna there, but he doesn't really need anything. Now, ideally here, he'd get maybe another couple of attackers. You know, a second Spritzy would be really nice here. A third Xerneas would be pretty helpful. Shaman to draw some cards. Oh, and that's lovely. Having an Ultra Ball to bin the Giratina, which, as we've discussed, he doesn't want to put down, and the second Fairy Garden. And with both players only playing Fairy Garden, that means the first Fairy Garden that goes down is going to stay there for the remainder of the game. So here comes the Geomancy, here comes the energies, and Paul's on the trail. Jake, I mean, maybe he can get a second Double Dragon energy and a Switch or an AZ. Start putting on some pressure with Giratina. But see, even then, Paul would just be able to KO the Giratina with Xerneas and knock all of his energy off the field. Now, he's got the energy, which will allow the free retreat with Fairy Garden. He's got the Aromatisse out, which means as long as he gets a Xerneas down, he is going to be able to get the Geomancy this turn, but it doesn't look like he's got it yet. And he has played his supporter for the turn, and it looks like he's just got energy and VS Seeker. It doesn't look like he's got very much. Now, there's potentially a little bit of baiting going on from Jake here. Because what Paul could do is move 2 energy up to the Xerneas, stick a Muscle Band down and get a cheap KO on the Shaman. But that would enable Jake, oh, and here comes the Enhanced Hammer for the Double Dragon. That would potentially, that would potentially allow Paul to get the KO on, Jake to get the KO on the Xerneas, knocking all of his energy off the field, but I don't think that's much of an issue. Now, he's got the muscle band on the bench Xerneas. He could get the KO here and get the 2 prizes. Is that what Jake wants him to do? Now, remember, to KO the Xerneas, we need a total of 7 energy or 6 and a muscle band. With Jake only having 1 on the field, and there would be 2 attached to the Xerneas, that means the maximum Jake can have is 4 energy and a muscle band, which is 100 damage, which isn't a KO. Now, it's very early in the game to try it, but I think it's the best play here, and it looks like Paul agrees with me. Because he's still going to have 3 energy on the field, which means next turn, Paul can put a 4th energy down, maybe KO the Giratina if he's got a Lysandra, and then see about maybe KOing the Lugia. Now, this is kind of panic stations for Jake, because the only real option he's got here is to take a 2 energy Lugia and do 100 damage to the Xerneas, but then he's leaving a Lugia in the active. Paul will have 4 energy on the field next turn, assuming he's got an energy. So if Paul is able to hit a Lugia energy muscle band, he'll be able to do 170 and KO the Lugia, and with the Giratina on the bench, that will basically be the end of the match. I don't see any way Jake can come back and win from that. So, I'm struggling to think of what would be the ideal play for Jake here. I mean, the 2 energy Lugia is definitely an option. Soften up the Xerneas. But leaving the Lugia in the active position does leave it open to a deep Hurricane. Now, like I said, Paul would need a Lugia and a muscle band and a 4th energy in order to pull off that combo. But if he could get it, that would basically be game. Jake would be down his Lugia. We wouldn't really have, any other options there. So Jake is taking, and this is the better play to go for. Like I say, leaving Lugia active would be far too risky, and he wouldn't even get a KO from it. So getting the Geomancy, getting some more energy onto the field, making Paul have to use Lysandra to take a KO. However, we see he's got one in hand. And that's big. Now, it doesn't look like he's got the Lugia play. And this is going to be interesting, because now he could just pull up the Giratina and kill it. But then there is an opportunity for the Lugia, and the Lugia next turn could definitely KO the Xerneas as long as Luke got a 4th energy, because it could use Deep Hurricane. And then Jake would be able to KO the Xerneas, leaving Paul with just 1 energy on the field and putting him in the driver's seat. So I think bringing up the Giratina and KOing it would be a bad play here, because the Lugia would then be able to KO Paul's Xerneas, leaving him with just 1 energy on the field. If he can get a Lugia energy muscle band Lysandra, lot to ask for, then pull up the Lugia, kill it, that's going to be game. Otherwise, I think the best play here, the conservative play, is just a Geomancy. He's not getting a KO on the active Xerneas. Using, I want to call it Rainbow Spears, not getting him any closer to winning the game. So just get a whole bunch more energy out. And he could use setup here, but I'd be a much bigger fan of getting energy on the field rather than taking it off the field. Now, depending on how many VS Seekers he's on, it's so that he's got to get rid of a Lysandra and a VS Seeker there, which is just plain harsh, because he had the 2 Lysandras he needed to close out the game. He had everything he needed to close out the game. However, what he didn't have was the Lugia. Now, he shouldn't use the Ultra Ball to get the Lugia here, because obviously that would give Jake the opportunity to Lysandra and kill it. So he's doing the only sensible play and using Geomancy. But it only looks like he got 1 energy from that. Now, I don't know how many energy, if any, he's got in hand. That's none. that means he's only got 4 fairy energy. And as a side note here, there was a misplay from Paul there. He didn't take the second fairy energy off the Xerneas. And here, we are going to see the KO with Lugia. And Jake now, the whole game has swung back around into his favour. Now Jake's well in control. We know that Paul doesn't have any energy in deck. We know that he doesn't have energy in hand. We know he's only got 2 energy on the field. And the Lugia's out. And he just scoops straight away. As we've noticed, he doesn't have enough energy. That's just harsh. So his only win condition was to have gotten the... He had really to get the Shaman off of Jake's bench the previous turn and KO it. But of course, that was such a dodgy play. It could have really, really backfired. So, nothing you can do there. A wonderful win from Jake. Bad luck from Paul. He didn't hit the best of luck there. But he ended up in a position where there's nothing he could do. He should have moved the energy off the active Evil Towel before he Geomancied on that last turn. But, having said that, I might be nitpicking. I don't really know if there's anything he could have done. Having those 2 energy prized and not drawing them earlier really was pretty much the death knell. Maybe if he'd been able to get his Lugia on the field, maybe he uses a Lysandra and a VS Seeker to take his last 4 prizes. Maybe that's the way to winning. But with the energy prized and Jake being able to go for the big Lugia, which is really what the mirror came down to in the end, there really was no options. Thank you very much for watching this, ladies and gentlemen. As always, make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already, and stick anything you've got to say down in the comments below. I will be back with more rounds from this lovely tournament very, very soon. So enjoy. Rounds 2 and upwards are coming very, very soon. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.